Good evening and welcome to Legal Tech Live. I'm your host, Nick Rishwain. We are here tonight with guest Andy Wilson of Logikcull. You're probably well aware of Logikcull. They've been around for, and I just reminded Andy of this before we started, this is year 17.
When I had hair.
When you had hair, I also had hair in 2004. Andy Wilson is Chief Executive Officer and co-founder at Logikcull. Which launched in 2004 with CTO and co-founder Sheng Yang. And correct me if I said that incorrectly. He is the visionary behind Logikcull's product and marketing strategy, which focuses on simplifying and democratizing the processes associated with revealing what's in data to three simple steps. That's upload, search, and download. You've earned your bachelor's degree in business information technology from Virginia Tech. How did you get into Ediscovery?
Oh, I've always wanted to get into legal tech ever since I was a little kid.
Yeah, you and like four others of us.
Are there really those people?
I don't know.
And understand what's going on with them. Well, let's see. I'll give you the short and sweet stuff. We can unpack it from there. But
perfect.
So I graduated in 2001. From Virginia Tech, and as you will recall, 2001 was .com disaster, and I had a job actually lined up to do software development for Arthur Andersen.
No kidding.
Yeah. Well, little did I know they were cooking the books for another little company called Enron. Enron plays a big role in my life, by the way.
Yeah.
Not intentionally. And then they rescinded the job. So I needed to find something to do. And the tech market was just abysmal. So I started a web design company. That's, I had a lot of background in that. And that was tough trying to sell websites to people in Kentucky. You have to first start with explaining what a website is. And then, why you need one.
And in 2001, that was a difficult sell, because people didn't think they needed them.
That's right. It was a difficult sell. So I needed to find work. I went up to Northern Virginia and started doing interviews. I had an offer on the table to work for the GSA, Government Services Association, and I would have been the youngest programmer there. And when I walked through the final, interview, and they're walking me through the hallways of all the cubes and just a lot of people that looked like they did not want to be there. I'm like, I don't want to be here either. And anyway, as luck would have it, a friend of mine from Virginia Tech was working for his brother's company in Falls Church, Virginia. And his brother's company was a litigation support printing vendor.
Okay.
So they were printing emails out. Anyways, he calls me up and he says, how's it going on the job market? I'm like, not so good. And he asked if I want to help him out. And he starts explaining the business to me that we're printing out emails to paper. It sounds ridiculous, but it's basically money because we're printing it out 25 cents a page.
Right.
Like that's insane. Come down, check it out. So I go down there and check it out. And it's just this, giant printer as far as the eye can see, and just printing at all hours of the day. And it's like a train wreck. You just can't look away. You're just rubbernecking left and right. It's like, why does this exist? And I just started asking more and more questions and, just being curious. And that was discovery. That was old school discovery.
Wow.
And that's how I fell into it. And once you fall into it, you just can't get out. Many problems to solve.
I mean, discovery is a big business. It's a huge part of litigation. So it's a huge aspect of litigation. So that, and I'm sure there were plenty of problems to solve and continue to have problems to solve.
Never ending.
Never ending.
One of the biggest challenges with data processing and search you can imagine.
Yeah. And so you started Logikcull in 2004. Things were somewhat recovering by then. And where did you guys begin the Logikcull journey? Were you still in Virginia at the time, or did you come out to California at that point?
Well, it wasn't actually Logikcull in 2004.
Okay.
It was logic.com. We still own that domain. we added the Cull later. We'll get to that in a bit. But in '04, Shin and I, he is also from Virginia Tech, decided to build Logic Systems Inc. and shortened it for logic.com. And the idea was not a web hosted SaaS platform. I mean, that basically didn't exist then. The idea was actually to sell sell data processing software that didn't have an interface.
Okay.
So we wrote a data processing software on a framework called Hadoop. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's
I've heard
open
of
source.
it. Yeah.
It's a what? So Google has Bigtable, right? And then the open source version of Bigtable is Hadoop. You might have heard of Cloudera. They're a big Hadoop shop. A couple of others. So anyway, so we built this processing engine because we're like, you shouldn't print stuff anymore. It should be digitized and made organized and searchable, and then maybe you can print it afterwards.
And God bless you for making that argument back then. We're all so grateful that there were people who led that way.
Well, so we wrote the software, and we didn't understand anything about business really, and we just thought we could sell it and give it, sell it to law firms and businesses, and they could run it themselves. And there was all command line,
Right.
like you couldn't. That's the only way you could operate it. And so we get laughed out of the room, and we're like, "Damn, what are we gonna do?" Just so happens we did a demo for an e-discovery vendor called Superior Glacier.
Okay.
And well, they weren't e-discovery at the time. They were a printing shop. They would scan documents and print them and stuff. And they were in New York City. And so we were trying to sell them the software. And I said, "How about you do this for us?" And we're like, "Okay, sure, no problem." And we came up with a price, some per gigabyte fee.
Right.
I remember what it was. And they shipped us a bunch of CDs and DVDs as a test pilot. We processed it, shipped it back the next day, and they were blown away because it would have taken them, I don't know how long to do that. And that's what started the business. We became a data processing service provider.
All right. And when did it come to be? Just Logikcull, and one or two others that come to mind who we won't name on your interview, but you guys became a cloud-based e-discovery provider. When did Logikcull become Logikcull, and when did you go to cloud-based?
Yeah, so from 2004 to 2009, we were just processing the shit out of data. We started to make a name for ourselves because we could handle large volumes of data, and it was a really high quality at a low cost.
Right.
So people ultimately figured out it wasn't Spirit Glacier doing it; it was Logikcull, and so they kind of cut out the middleman. They would just send us data. Now, keep in mind, the early operation was my condo in Washington, D.C.
Right.
And we used my dining room as the business, and we had a rack full of servers, like a 42U rack, and a closet, and it was plugged in all over the place. We were illegally operating a data center there because the cloud didn't exist. Right. Now we built our own servers from scratch. I mean, it was hair on fire type of moment. That's why I don't have any hair anymore. This is the early days of e-discovery. So the business kind of exploded because of that, we just kind of caught the wave, so to speak. Eventually we got out of the condo and whatnot. But from 04 to 09, the business was exploding. And along the way, the recession hit, the big housing recession, 08, I think, somewhere around there. And that caused just enough delay in our business where we had time to think. And we came away with, there's no way people in the future are going to keep shipping us hard drives of data to process so that we could ship it back on a hard drive. Like, that's just, there's no way. It's all going to be done in the cloud. Our whole business is going to be automated. It's going to be brought down to the floor. It's going to be easy to use. And we had kind of an oh shit moment. Do we sell the business? Do we keep doing what we're doing? Or do we pivot into something else? And we made the decision to build Logikcull. Like, you know what? It doesn't exist today. It needs to exist in the future, because we realized there were two big things that were eventually come to a head. One is the data volumes are going to keep growing up and to the right in size and variety. And two is the deadlines that legal teams specifically are under aren't going to give a damn about that data volume. So how are you going to be able to get through all that information in the time frame that you need to in a cost-effective way? And so that became the mission, the rallying cry to build Logikcull. Like, you know what, we need to democratize this because this thing is outrageously expensive. It's too slow, it's too complicated. And eventually everybody is going to need to do this, not just these big banks and big law firms who we were working for.
So it's interesting. You're making that transition from the hard drives in and around the time that Netflix is making the transition from the mailing the CDs, right?
That's right, building a streaming service. Yeah,
going to streaming, and you're going to cloud-based as well.
Yep.
That seems it seems the way that it, I know you probably like to compare yourself to Netflix. It was very similar, very similar visions there.
One day from a market cap perspective, that'd be great.
Right. But I mean, it's very very similar kind of viewpoints there, right? This is unsustainable to keep mailing these things.
Yeah, trying to think, the Wayne Gretzky, quote, skate where the puck is going and hope you're right. Like that's kind of how we saw it. Is this is all going to be in the cloud. It's going to be fully automated. It's going to be predictably priced and affordable for everybody. And yeah, I mean, it took a long time. I thought it was going to take us 2 years to build. It took us 4.
Right.
Pretty hairy problem. You have to solve 2. It's not like a normal SaaS app. Most SaaS products are just a database, with a user interface.
Right.
Logikcull is 2 parts. There's a very rich search interface to go through all the data, and then there's this incredibly advanced data processing engine on the back end to help just to process all the data, at scale. So you get thousands and thousands of servers, getting launched to crunch through data.
Yeah, that one of the fascinating things. So when I got into legal technology, which was maybe 2010, legal technology for a lot of years was Ediscovery. It seemed like
yeah,
that
for
was
sure. Dominated legal tech. That's all it was.
That was almost all the advanced legal technology that was taking place in the Ediscovery space. You said it took you 4 years, and we do try and get into the founder journey. 4 years to build it, the cloud-based system, and this is one of those user journey kind of things that people need. Well,
we had to build the cloud too, Nick.
You had to build the cloud too.
AWS was too immature for a product like what we needed to build, so we actually we had experience building our own servers from scratch from the condo days, right?
Which I have to ask, like, what was the electricity bill like back then? Do you remember?
Well, it was
condo electricity bill with a server farm.
It was hundreds of dollars, maybe over $1,000 a month.
Wow.
But the real challenge wasn't the electricity, because we were making money to pay for that.
Right.
The real challenge was keeping the AC, because DC gets pretty damn hot.
Yeah.
And so we would keep it down at 60 just so it would stay at like 75, 80 degrees, which my wife hated. She hated not having a dining room. So eventually we got out of that and had a real office. And then we also because we had so many servers, we had to get an actual data center through Equinix.
Okay.
So we had a private cage, hundreds of servers there, and a direct fiber line from Equinix in Ashburn, Virginia, to our office in DC. We had to dig up K Street at one point to lay that fiber line. Yeah, because this is all pre-cloud, so we had to build our own cloud and all this automated processing there, because AWS wasn't mature enough to handle what we needed to do. This was 2011, 2012.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until like 2016, I think, we were able to actually migrate everything off of our own stuff into Amazon.
Wow. That's fascinating. So you had to build that, and before you even had a cloud. That is. Tell us about some obstacles you had with that. Like like the ones that
beyond digging up K Street,
beyond digging up K Street and pissing off lobbyists and but just like the business, from the business standpoint, what was that like? What were you faced with as a founder in that time?
Well, so we were not venture backed at the time. So all the money that we were using to build this service that would eventually kill the old service, it was a very micro level of Innovator's Dilemma, if you're familiar with that
Mhm.
book, where we knew we needed to kill our old business model, and it's so hard to do. I mean, even at that small scale, it's so incredibly hard. So whenever I see a big company do it, I'm like, wow, that is impressive.
And because you're making money in that business
That's
too,
right.
right? So
Yeah, lots of money.
so
Yeah.
you're thinking, man, what am I doing killing this thing?
That's right. So we were bootstrapped. So we had intentionally, we saved a lot of money to fund the R&D of the cloud. It was, you know, millions of dollars in the bank to fund it, because we had to hire engineers, right? We had to buy all this extra equipment. Yeah, I mean, you name it. It was outrageous amount of money to get it off the ground. But at the same time, we needed to run the old services business, right?
Right.
So it's kind of like the seesaw effect, where if the services business didn't have enough business to fund it, we'd have to stop development. That's why it took 4 years. It would have taken 2 years if we didn't have any distractions.
Right.
Like if we had probably less than that. But we had the distraction of the seesaw effect. So we had to go back and sell more services to bring in revenue to then fund the development of the product.
Okay.
So that was the hardest thing, because we almost ran out of money a couple of times there. It was pretty scary.
That is scary. And of course, the founders or business owners at that time are thinking, I'm assuming, like, this better work because we're pouring all this money into the development of this thing, rather than paying ourselves.
That's right. Yeah, we're true believers. You know, you people say there's the your product's your baby kind of thing, and I think early on, like, that was very true. And so once we got customers, if they didn't like it, we would feel personally assaulted.
Right.
How dare you call my baby ugly? To this day, I get a little bit of that sometimes, and somebody gives us a low score on the NPS, but I'm matured beyond that.
You've matured beyond that. Well, you probably hear it enough that the skin thickens as well too, right?
It's well, yeah, you have as many near-death experiences that you get over the course of 17 years. You're immune to a lot of things.
Cami Lopez over in the Facebook chat is laughing at that, the getting used to that. So Cami, thank you. I'm glad you're here. I didn't know you were here. If you have questions for Andy, please get them in.
What's up, Cami?
What was a big success you had in that stage of building it? Like, was there a point where you're developing your own cloud and you're like, oh, okay, now I know this is going to work? Was it when you turned it on and people started using it? Was it before that? What, you know, anything like that really resonated, like, oh man, this is it. I know we're on the right track. We were all in, but now I'm seeing it clearly. Yeah,
well, there's probably a couple of defining moments I can think of. One on like the product side, and another on like the cash money side. You also get like when I designed a lot of it, and I would go and sit down with prospective customers, and I designed it all in Keynote, believe it or not.
Wow.
Yeah, well, Keynote's a vector program, so you can actually do a lot with that. Anyway, so I would go sit down with people and show them this very high fidelity wireframe of the product, and some people started trying to click on things thinking it was real. But you get, seeing their reaction to what this product will eventually do was so inspiring. And then I would bring those stories back, because I'm on the front lines doing all this customer development stuff, and then bring them back to the team, and then share these stories with the engineers to get them all fired up, like we're on the right track. So those happen, quite a bit. But on the product side, one of the things that we had to solve was the full automation of the e-discovery process, which is really freaking hard. And that's the thing that really took the most time, because previously you'd have to call a vendor and they would, ask you how you want to process the data. Do you want to dedupe it this way? Do you want text and metadata extraction? Do you want to OCR? So we had to do everything without anyone thinking, right? So drag and drop, that was the idea. It had to be fully automated in under 3 steps. That was the idea. And previously that would take like 3,000 steps.
Right.
No joke. So So once we were able to actually do that, and the size of data that we used to think was a lot of data was a 1 gigabyte PST. And if it were to process fully by itself, with unattended, it was amazing. And so then when that actually happened, when that 1 gig PST actually processed, and it took hours to process, by the way.
Wow.
And today that's like, no big deal. We had a customer upload a 300 gigabyte mailbox a couple of weeks ago, and it was like, no problem. So that was huge on the product side. It was, popping champagne. And then on the business side, we were at one point, we were so close to running out of money, like near death experience. We would do anything. And we got this lead from this law firm that needed to process all these PDFs for this big loan case, and ended up being the countrywide mortgage litigation. And they needed to process every single mortgage document and date stamp it and OCR it. Wow. And nobody could do it in the time frame they needed it done, because it's millions of documents, right? And it needed to be done in 2 weeks or something like that. And we said, we'll do it. And they're like, well, how much is it going to cost? And we needed $250,000. And so we said $250,000. And they said, okay. I was like, damn it. I should have said $2.5 million.
Right. Yeah, this is the countrywide.
This is like a rounding
falling
error.
apart. Yeah.
I was so pissed at myself after that, but it worked. We took it on. We had to write some custom software because we had no freaking clue how to do this thing. And so we wrote this custom software to parallel process this enormous set of data. It was terabytes of data. And there's a whole other story with that. We almost lost all the data, accidentally deleting it all at the last day where they needed to deliver it. It was a freaking nightmare. It involved a coin flip, and thank God it went the right way. But that was meaningful because we also made them wire us the money.
Yeah, before you got started.
Yeah. So
Cammie's loving this. She's saying this is so good in the chat. So and you should get to know her. She's a legal tech founder herself.
Oh, cool.
I have to ask, I know part of this, but it also sort of started your business. I know part of this story, but maybe many of our listeners don't, but it used to be at any legal conference when I'd come across Ediscovery software, and I believe I believe somebody from Logikcull 5 or 6 years ago showed me this at LegalTech San Francisco. And the Enron case is the case that everybody would use. Why is that? Why is that big in Ediscovery, that case?
Well, everybody knows it, for one. And Ediscovery, by our own data volume, is 55% of all documents in Logikcull are emails.
Okay.
Right. So Ediscovery is basically an email problem. And in order to test Ediscovery tools, you need a large corpus of email. How do you get that? You can't just going to go steal somebody's email. That's not going to fly. So luckily, I can't remember who bought it, but all the emails in the Enron litigation became public record. And so that became the source at which you would go and test on, because you could find juicy stuff, right? Kinley saying some really inappropriate things, and the whole debacle that happened there. So you could test all kinds of things inside that data, in addition to processing all of the data in a way that needed to happen for Ediscovery.
And that I appreciate you sharing that, because I think that's what was described to me by one of your representatives when I first saw this, because I may have seen it at more than one location or something like that. And
well, we made our own data set. You probably saw we actually made something way more interesting and funny.
It probably is, but for whatever I saw distinctly, I remember the Enron example being used, and I believe
in conjunction with liably.corp, liably.ly. We made up a fake company, created email accounts for them, had a bunch of funny, nefarious emails being sent back and forth.
Right.
Just to liven up the very dry demos that you can get into with Ediscovery and lawyers, as you might imagine.
As I do imagine. But that leads me to another question. in say 2011, 2012, you talked about, here you're building a cloud-based software as a service. How was the customer education point of that, right? Lawyers were not used to using a lot of, okay, now I'm going to do this drag and drop myself. Was there the sales process? Was it heavy on education as to how the product worked?
So the things that we picked up on very early was the word cloud was really poisonous to the sales conversation. And so I distinctly remember having this conversation internally, like, what if we stop using the word cloud? What if we said instead the benefits of the cloud? Don't worry about vendors anymore. Data is backed up and secured, like all this other stuff. And of course, like people would get it and they're like, oh, these benefits sound amazing. And really you're just talking like the benefits of the cloud, right?
Right. But without so the messaging from that word was scary.
Yeah, and it wasn't really up until a couple of years ago that we started bringing cloud back to our messaging. I mean, even to this day.
Yep.
The world of discovery, at least our world, as we see it, roughly 8 out of 10 of our customers come from a non-consumption state. And meaning like, and that's another Clayton Christensen concept where, most emerging markets are doing the thing that you're doing, like you're selling, but they're not consuming some sort of software or service to do it. They're figuring out how to hack it themselves, grinding their own coffee one by one versus using a machine, that kind of thing.
Right.
And so what you see in the world of discovery, and to this day, every day, people sign up for this thing and we say, what were you doing before? And 80% of them are, oh, well, we were kind of hacking it together manually, looking at emails one by one inside of Outlook, or opening up emails in Adobe, manually redacting them, all this stuff that software can now automate if you consume it, right? So there's just this massive, non-consumption state for I think it's probably broad across legal tech, by the way, not just e-discovery.
Right. And did you find that I maybe I need to rephrase the question a little bit, but did you find that customers had difficulty learning the software once it was, or was it intuitive?
Not really.
Was it intuitive? I'm just thinking, 10 years ago, which is now I've been in legal tech for 11, and I had probably till 2015, and sometimes it's much less today, but I had users who didn't know how to search a website even back then.
Well, e-discovery is there's kind of three problems.
Okay.
The first is, how do you get data into an e-discovery product?
Right.
That's historically, that's really complicated. That's why you hire an expert to get the data in, right? Then the second problem is actually the more complicated piece, which is, how do you search it? How do you analyze it in a way? That's where Boolean searches and predictive logic and those kinds of things come into play. And then the third one is, how do you package it up in the way that's required by whatever standard you need to support, which is often dictated to you by the requesting party, which could be the government, opposing counsel, a citizen, in case of public records requests, those kinds of things. So the reason why I bring up these three different categories is some are easier than others, right? So the entry point, which is the data ingestion, anybody can do that. Like, we had zero problem with that. It's like, can you upload a picture to Facebook? Then you can use Logikcull. That was the messaging, right? And that's still true today. The second part, though, is where you would see, well, what's a Boolean search? What does that even mean? What's metadata? Like, people didn't know what metadata was.
Right.
Or how to conduct it.
They still don't.
Yeah, to a large extent. That's correct. So that is where the most learning happens, in the search and analysis. And back when we started, the data volumes weren't as bad as they are today.
Right.
So it wasn't a huge deal. You didn't really need to do a lot of searching. Now, like, the searching can be insane, across millions of records. Like, we see a ton of chat data now. That's now the number 3 data source uploaded to Logikcull. across
Wow.
all customers. Yeah, it's wild. And it produces enormous amount of data. 1 GB of Slack data, as just one example, will produce close to 1 million pages of content.
Wow.
Yeah, 1 GB of Slack data, which is kind of wild.
Wow.
Yeah, and the vast majority of it's noise, you know?
Right.
And that's true for across all of Logikcull's customers. We did this product launch event in the beginning of the year where we shared some of these stats. And we showed that across all of the data that's uploaded to Logikcull, 97% of it is never looked at.
Which makes sense because probably most of it's mundane day-to-day stuff that has
Yep.
no bearing on anything.
Yeah, and it's been going up. We showed a chart like what's it look like for the past 5 years. And 5 years ago, I don't know, it was like 92%, and it just keeps going up and to the right. This year, we're projecting it to be around 98%.
Wow.
And the Slack data, the amount of data that's not reviewed there is actually in the 99%. So you can see like 99.7% is irrelevant.
Interesting. That's all of that is fascinating to me. So you've said two things. I want to get the third one. So email data review is primarily what Ediscovery is. Then you said the third most common source of information is chats now. What was the second one on that? What's besides email?
Office docs.
Office docs. Okay.
Yeah, and then there's another one that's rising, which is why we just recently released this. But audio and video content are starting to they're getting into the top 10, and that's becoming a real big pain. Like these kinds of things, this is being recorded.
Right.
How do you review this at scale? We had a customer just the other day. They had to review 7,000 voice messages in response to some investigation, and we recently released audio video transcription automatically. So when you drag and drop all this, you can do it at scale. You could dump terabytes of audio and video content, and it'll just transcribe it all, right?
And then you can Boolean search that transcription.
You can Boolean search it. You can see the transcript in the viewer, and you can click on a word, and it'll take you right to that point in the file. It'll start playing. Anyway, so we turned that on for them, and the next day they culled it from 7,000 to 8 messages, and they were going to manually listen to all 7,000 one by one with outside counsel. Would have cost about $100,000.
Wow.
So that's gonna happen more and more. We already see it in the data, it's just going up and to the right.
And we see, I mean, we can see it in our Twitter feed, right? It's the video of the police officer interactions. There's the video of the car accident. There's the video of the arrest. I mean, it's just, there's so much audio and video available. That makes perfect sense.
And we service a ton of those government customers. So
do you? Yeah.
That's why you see, it's not just, I mean, the government is probably more exposed to this because public records law and litigation around these types of video and audio feeds. But corporate customers are starting to have more and more of this content. As an example, like if you have a truck driving service, you probably have cameras in the cockpit.
Right.
Those little bumper stickers that say, "How am I driving?"
Right.
Well, when you call and say this person was on their phone, that triggers an internal investigation where they have to review the cockpit data at that point in time.
So,
it's going to become more common.
Interesting. So let's change a little bit here. We've been talking about 35 minutes. I don't want to keep you all night, but I do want to hear at one point you went from bootstrap to decided to get outside funding.
Yeah.
How did you make that decision?
Slowly.
Slowly. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And what kind of things did you we've had folks on here who have bootstrapped their startups. We've had people on here who've sought venture capital, and there's positives to both and negatives to both.
Yeah. Here's how I think about it.
Okay.
And here's how I did think about it. So, money is just an input, right? So like it's and it should be thought of as fuel to a fire or some objective you're trying to achieve. So the way that we looked at it is, okay, this is working. We want to accelerate it, which means we want to hire more people. to build more technology. We had a roadmap that we wanted to achieve that we couldn't achieve given our bootstrap. The money wasn't coming in fast enough, right? We wanted to hire more people to go out there and market it, actually spend on marketing. We weren't spending on marketing, it was all word of mouth. So, I looked at it as, okay, well, could this help accelerate that? Yes or no? And I said, okay, yes, it can. We can take something that, at our rate then, maybe it was going to take us, 3 years to get to the things we wanted, but with enough capital, we could get there in a year, right?
Okay.
And that's important, right? It's important to bring products to the market in the time frame that they need to be brought, because so much of it is timing, right?
Right.
So that was one aspect. Then you have to look at it from like the venture capital lens, because they need to see, is this thing going to be a venture worthy business, right? So you put your VC hat on and you're like, okay, can I get to a scale where if this person gives me X, I can return Y, and Y is a good outcome for the VC. And that was, yes, check the box. Like, this is a massive market. We do think we can get to this X, these milestones and continue to grow that way. And that's how I look at it. So, what's the needs of the business? Does it help accelerate? Because venture capital is fuel. They will look at you as like, okay, can you hire more people to get more done faster? Can you grow revenue faster? Can you capture more market share faster? That's what they're looking for, because if you can do that, then the value of the business is going to grow at a much faster rate, which of course increases the value for them as well.
Excellent. And you said you did this slowly. How did you analyze that? Besides, you just gave us great examples of the inputs and the reasons to do that. What were your personal concerns about making this decision to seek outside capital and grow that way?
Well, there's a bunch of concerns you go through. It is some of the most expensive money you'll ever bring on, because of the dilution that you'll incur. But you've got to fundamentally believe that, would you rather have 100% of a grape or 10% of a watermelon? That's right. Kind of the math you need to square in your head. And so the way that I was looking at it and taking it slow is, I wanted to understand, one, like what type of VC would be a good fit for us, given our stage. I wanted somebody who could help us see around corners,
right?
But not too many corners, not like 10 blocks away. I was thinking more like 2 or 3 blocks away.
Okay.
Who can help me see around those corners, because that's going to be more fresh. And then can they add operational experience to me? So I canvass a lot of folks, and then you also need to look at the fund size is really important, because you should be thinking about what one really simple heuristic to do when you're doing venture capital is you ask them how big is the fund that they have, and then internally you need to be thinking, can I return that full amount of money? Like, if we were to sell the business in the future, could I give them their share as that size? So if they have $100 million fund, can I give them $100 million? Because if you can do that, if you can actually pencil that out, that is a really good place to be. And that's kind of the shorthand for trying to find fund founder fit, right? You don't want to go too big. You don't want to go too small, because it really depends on what you can deliver back to them.
That's interesting. I've not heard that description before, or certainly on the show I have not. So it's almost finding the right size fund for what you're trying to achieve. Interesting.
Yeah, it's one of the more important things that you'll face, because there's other things that go along with that. The smaller funds are not going to have a lot of board seats.
Right.
They're not going to have a ton of companies. They're going to be more invested in you. Right. They're going to help market you to other investors, because they want, it's a I wouldn't call it a pyramid scheme, but it's definitely like a step-up system where there's a feeding process where the smaller funds feed into the larger funds, so on and so forth. And so, because it takes so long for a venture investment to actually return real liquidity. Most of it's just paper markup liquidity, right?
Right.
But those paper markups are what allow the smaller funds to go raise more funds. If they can say, hey, look, here's how much our IRR is in our current portfolio that doesn't actually have any real cash associated with it, but once it does, just imagine what will happen.
Right.
So you get a lot of time and attention with the smaller funds than you would, and this isn't always true, but it's generally true with than compared with the bigger funds. That's why I went with I looked at a bunch of these folks, Jason Lemkin, who had so many of the things I wanted, checked off. Good person, number one, super smart, former lawyer, understands SaaS, understands documents and all that stuff, and was at a smaller stage fund at the time. Now he's running a fund called SaaStr, which you might have heard of.
Yeah, which is impressive. So he grew and you grew, and that's but at the time that was the right fit for you. I think that's really
that's right.
Really important thing to share. Any advice? We're about 40 minutes in. We'll wrap up here in a couple of minutes. I sure hope you'll maybe come back on in a year or two and give us an update, because you've had just tons of great information to share for our audience. But any advice that comes to mind for those early stage, maybe pre-seed or seed stage and Series A folks?
Like people have actually already raised money or are looking to raise?
Or looking to raise, and that, well, maybe both. Those who are looking to raise, and then those who have raised.
Well, advice is, as it relates to like fundraising or like building a business or product development.
Let's go general. Let's go general in building the business. You've given great answers on the fundraising stuff. Just advice on building the business. What is something that an early stage founder needs to, maybe it's just the one thing that you think is like the most committed thing that you had to do over and over?
Beyond replacing your stomach with iron, you can chew nails or glass. Well, I mean, I'll answer the question, but before I will say, my guess is most legal tech founders should not raise venture capital.
Okay.
At least right out of the gate. That's
okay.
my guess. And I say that because, one, the legal market is such that you can actually make money immediately. Like you can do it as a service, you can do it as an actual software and sell some sort of subscription or transactional thing. It doesn't really matter. So you can actually get off the ground, fairly quickly. So I would encourage people to look for other sources of funding before they bring on the venture capital. Because once you bring on venture capital, you're committing yourself to a kind of a hamster wheel of fundraising. And these days, companies are raising money like every 12 months.
Wow.
Yeah, which is nuts.
I hadn't heard we're down to the 12 months. I'd heard we're down to 18, but
no, some of them are even shorter than that. Some are raising like every 3 to 6 months because they're growing so fast. And the market's crazy. Yeah,
the market's crazy.
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely crazy. And it's dangerous to sign up for these crazy high valuations because you need near flawless execution. So if you fuck up on your product market fit, your strategy, and you need to pivot, you need to make an adjustment, the margin of error is so incredibly small when you're burning a ton of cash. Because the reason why it's 18, or what it used to be 18, is that's the time where you fall off the cliff if you don't raise more money.
Right.
Because you're burning, it's a burn down, like in the software development, you're burning down all the tickets to the bottom. And same, your cash balance, you're burning it all the way down to go and raise the next round. And that you need that 6-month buffer to go raise the next round, right? So it's really kind of 12 months if you really think about it. So anyway, so I would encourage people to really rethink that. I know it's the fun thing to do right now, and it seems like it's fairly easy and cheap, but I tell you, it is not cheap capital, and be careful what you're signing up for. Unless you have really strong product market fit and it's like a straight line, which it never is. You're going to have to make pivots along the way. So in addition to that, let's put that aside. In the legal market, it's an interesting market because it's a marketplace, right? So you can sell to the law firms doing the work, the client work. You can also sell directly to the clients, like an ironclad as an example, going and selling to the business itself. You can sell to third parties. You can do a channel route, which is what Ediscovery has historically been. You know, Relativity, as an example, got to scale not by going direct to consumer or direct to business. They went through the channel, sold it to an Ediscovery vendor, and then they installed it and then used it for their clients, right? So there's 3 avenues to make money. I would encourage every single legal tech founder to be very conscious about which avenue you want to go, because your business model, the way that you price your service, is going to be really impacted by that, right? Okay. So if you're going to sell to the law firm is either going to bill it back to their client, like in the case of Ediscovery, or it's going to come out of their pocket. And if it's going to come out of their pocket, you need to have a really compelling value prop that you're going to make them money. Right. So lawyers in the business of making money, selling their hourly services. And so think about that whenever you're pricing your product and what ROI you're delivering. So can I help them make money? Because if you can help them make money, you can sell, really high subscription services. If it's a cost factor to them, it's really difficult to sell that as a subscription to the
it would have to be something that they desperately need.
That's right. That's exactly right. So you figure out like what work is it? Is it something that can be passed off to the client? If it is, you can actually charge a lot more for it, because you're basically dealing with other people's money. And if you can also show that it helps make the law firm money, then great, that's fantastic. If you're selling direct, it's the inverse. If you're going to the business side of things, if you're selling to in-house legal, they don't care about making money. They're trying to save money. And so the value prop that you have to pitch there is time savings, because they're the ones hiring the law firms or the ALSPs or whatever. And so if you can shrink time for them with your software, you can capture the value accordingly and price your product into that, right? Right. And then with the last avenue, with third-party suppliers that are selling as kind of resellers, that the best way there is subscription, like traditional enterprise SaaS, from my experience, where you just sign them up for 1-year commitment kind of thing. And that'll dictate so much more about your business. You're going to need salespeople. It's probably not something that you can do from like a pure software driven model. You're going to need people on the street with quotas and those types of things. So really think deeply about, which customer you want to sell to, what value is it delivering? Is it saving them time? Is it making them money? And then price your product accordingly. There's a really good book out there that I encourage every entrepreneur to read called Monetizing Innovation. It's one of those that I wish I had read when I first started. It'll teach you how to price your product in the right way so that you can capture the appropriate amount of value, which that's the big problem. Like, a lot of people undervalue the products that they create, and they don't end up capturing what they've actually created.
Great. And of course, everybody's blowing up now as we're wrapping up here, but Joe Ott says that's an interesting perspective. He's been self-financing his startup while practicing law. Cami says this is really great advice. And Joe also says insightful breakdown for the pricing strategy. So he appreciates that. Joe, the book was Monetizing Innovation. Monetizing Innovation. Thank you.
It's on my bookshelf right now. I've got a whole list of books that I refer to often.
Excellent. So Monetizing Innovation for pricing strategy. Andy, this has been great. The crew was quiet tonight, but you and I did just fine. We didn't need a lot of interruption. And I really appreciate it. I think you shared some just really valuable knowledge for those founders out there and lawyers who are also being founders. So I thank you for that. Where can people find you online?
I'm on Twitter, IDDupe.
IDDupe, and it is IDEDUPE.
That's right.
And they can get you, I'm sure, on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, less active there, but yeah, Twitter that's my safe place.
Yeah, Twitter's a safe place, and you will see from time to time, Andy will share some really great tweets on business and on financing and things like that.
Yeah,
I think where I caught you, I was just following and reading along, and you had some really great information to share. And tell them where they find your company.
Oh, Logikcull.com?
Yep. It's LOG and then
Yes.
CULL.
We added
LOG.
the cull later because that ends up being what the product is supposed to do really
Cull
well.
large. Yep. Culling large amounts of data.
All the noise.
Yep. Yeah, it's excellent. Well, Andy, thank you so much for being here tonight. Don't disappear when we stop recording, folks. Cami, Joe, Mo, I see you were here earlier as well. Thank you for joining in. And we will see you guys. We're going to have a couple of weeks off now. So I'm going to take a summer vacation, and I will see you in August. We've got some more female founders coming up starting in August. We'll be supporting that crew. All right. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Andy.